It does seem to appear that there's going to be this freeing up of time. And the question is, what does the employer do with that time, with that employee?
And so, yes, we can give a graphic designer a tool to make them smarter, faster, better in their job, but we can't replace judgment, evaluation, cognitive, content work, creativity, innovation.
That is like super, super interesting. I don't think anybody really even thought of it that way.
So there's a big disconnect between what organizations expect and what humans are actually doing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Philip Palumbo. I'm the host of the Palumbo podcast, where we interview some of the most successful founders to learn about their journey to the top. Today, my guest is someone who has spent her career putting hard numbers behind what many leaders only sense intuitively. That people, teams, culture are core drivers of enterprise value. Dr. Solange Charas is a board director, former C-suite HR executive, and seasoned consultant whose work focuses on helping organizations quantify and optimize their investments in human capital. She has deep experience advising both management teams and boards on innovative HR strategies, with a particular emphasis on the financial return on people-related investments. Her PhD research broke new ground in understanding how to select and manage high-performing interdisciplinary teams and how team quality at the board and C-suite level translates into corporate financial performance. That work has been published in leading academic and practitioner outlets, including the International Journal of Disclosure and Governance, Harvard Business Review, the Corporate Board, and the Conference Board's Director Notes. She holds a BA from US Berkeley, an MBA from Cornell, a certificate in negotiations from Harvard, and a PhD in management from Case Western Reserve University, where she developed the TQ methodology to measure and predict how board and top management teams impact financial results. She's also a professor of professional practice at Columbia University, where she teaches Masters of Human Capital. So, Solange, welcome to my podcast, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I'm exhausted just listening.
I'm not. I'm excited to be listening to you. So the key thing, I heard financial performance 3 or 4 times of what I just said. And I think super interested in anybody listening to this who manages people. So first of all, how do you define human capital?
So human capital is the labor input into a business model. So most business models, even the ones that use human capital the least, like a real estate investment trust, still need to understand how to optimize the investment in people to generate the highest level of productivity, which will generate the highest level of return for an organization. Most organizations in the United States spend at least 50% or more. Bank of America spends like 70% of their operating expense on people. And we need to understand whether or not those investments are actually driving value creation for the enterprise.
Yeah, this is really interesting, especially in this environment we're in, because AI, the idea behind AI is to increase productivity per employee. So for example, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA talks about human capital being a $50 trillion number globally. And he says that if we could take, and he simplifies it, breaks it down, and if you take an employee who's making 100 grand and we spend 10% of that 100 grand, which is 10 grand, on AI tools to increase productivity of that particular person 2 to 3 times, obviously the output would be tremendous for the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are your views on that?
First, let me talk about AI and human capital. So AI needs to be a tool to amplify the impact of humans. Until maybe next year, at the rate that AI is developing, where AI can begin to use judgment to make decisions, we still need humans in the loop. And yes, I'm not the first person to coin that phrase, but it is really important because humans can still do things that AI can't. AI is designed to augment, to supplement what humans do.
Correct.
And what Stella Lepouchore, my co-author on the book that we wrote, and I say is that employees are not going to lose their job because AI is replacing them. Employees are going to lose their jobs because they don't know how to use AI to make them more valuable to the organization. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's a complicated and complex exercise to think about how AI can augment human work. It's not a blanket statement. We need to really understand what a job is designed to do, understand the repetitive, low value aspects or accountabilities of that job, and then figure out how to use AI to replace some of the more uninteresting, low value, repetitive work that humans do. You can't simply say, oh, I've got a graphic designer, I'm just going to use AI from now on. Because that's not what graphic designers just do, is create design. They actually use their judgment to understand how to create design that connects with humans, that express concepts. And so, yes, we can give a graphic designer a tool to make them smarter, faster, better in their job, but we can't replace judgment, evaluation, cognitive content work, creativity, innovation. And remember, AI is not innovative. It doesn't come up with new things. It just repackages the stuff that you're telling it. So really important to think through in a very strategic way how AI can be used to augment, to supplement people, humans. Ernst & Young came out with a really interesting study where they said that, and it's a recent study, and forgive me if I don't understand the numbers because I didn't look at it right before we got on this podcast.
Yeah, that's okay.
Something like 70% of organizations want employees to use AI to support their work, as you said, to become more productive. But only 5% of employees are actually using meaningful AI in their work. So there's a very big disconnect between what organizations expect and what humans are actually doing. So,
and I guess because it comes down to, okay, what is your particular job? Number one, what is your exact tasks? And so with the AI tools that are available today, how can we use that? How can we use those tools to take, I don't know, I guess take care of part of those tasks, which would then free up your time and and go out there and
then you need to decide. So I've redesigned a few jobs, like some classic jobs, like an accountant or a benefits administrator. And what I've looking at how those jobs are designed and what the key accountabilities and the key tasks are. AI can probably replace about 30% of the time that people take to do those repetitive low value tasks. So now you've got 30% of a person's time freed up. Organizations need to be strategic about how they're going to decide how to use that 30% of time. So some organizations, you said NVIDIA is saying all of a sudden somebody is 30% more, can be 30% more productive. We can throw 30% more work at that person because they now have the bandwidth to do more work. But you have to ask yourself, how quickly are we going to get to burnout? Right? Because today, those low value, repetitive, non-cognitive content tasks actually give the employee a little bit of a mental break while they're working. Because humans cannot work at 90% of capacity, right? That burnout is hit. Actually, it's not burnout, it's psychosis that's hit when people are 90% productive or more. So we want to make sure that even though we have the capacity to have people more productive, that we're not burning them out, because it's going to cost the organization a lot more to replace a leaving employee than it is to keep somebody and make sure that they have job satisfaction and that their jobs and the expectation for their roles are in line.
That is like super, super interesting. I don't think anybody really even thought of it that way, where all of a sudden an employee has these tools, it frees up 30% of their time. Now we're saying that they're more productive, but the problem in being so productive is you could actually get burnt out.
Absolutely.
So that's a scientific study.
Well, I don't know that somebody has actually studied the relationship between AI augmentation.
Right. I think it's way too early.
It's not that they're more productive, because people can be more productive voluntarily. It's that they're being asked to. So let's back up for a second. So I said, we've got 30% more time. What do we do with that time? Do we give people 30% more work to do, which will probably lead to burnout? And I'll tell you why in a second. Do we use some of that time to invest in people and learning and development and upskilling? Do we help our organizations build bench strength to allow organizations to promote from within, because we're developing our resources from within, which is, in my opinion, a really smart thing to do? Because again, it costs a lot less to promote somebody from within that has the right skills,
absolutely,
competencies for a job, than to bring somebody in from the outside, and it takes time for them to learn the job, to learn the organization. And think about the morale boost, the engagement boost that you create in an organization when employees can see that there are opportunities for growth and promotion. So that's something else that you can do with that 30% of time. The third thing is you can just give people time off. You can say, we're going to go to a 4-day work week. We're going to give you 1 day off a week. That's only 20%, right? So there are lots of ways that you can use that additional time or bandwidth that's freed up when you introduce AI into a role, and you teach and train your employees how to use AI the right way. Because remember, AI can be a very dangerous tool in the wrong hands.
You could also say, well, there's 30% free up of time of employees. Perhaps then that extra time can be used to grow the business.
That's right.
Right. So now all of a sudden, just keep it simple. You have a $1 million revenue generated business that now, because of this free time, is now 2 million. And now that extra $1 million of additional business, right, over time needs to be serviced with additional employees. And so so it's interesting to see where this whole thing goes, obviously, and we don't know exactly how it's going to go, but it does seem to appear that there's going to be this freeing up of time. And the question is, what does the employer do with that time, with that employee?
Right.
Not every employee, even though they have extra time, are capable of selling, right?
Selling, doing better customer service. I mean,
right. It goes on and on and on.
When you think about our economy, which is about 84%, 84% of our GDP is service oriented.
Right.
For the moment, we still need humans to provide services to our customers, right? So I was telling my students the other day about McDonald's. Like in the old days, you used to go to McDonald's, and I love that McDonald's came out and said 50% of Americans at some point in their life had worked at McDonald's as a trainee or somehow, most of high school kids get jobs at.
Pretty interesting.
Right? So in the old days, you walked into a McDonald's and it's all human labor. You ordered from a human. A human was making hamburgers and making fries and making milkshakes. A human was putting it in bags and giving it to you, taking your money and making change. Today, you walk into a McDonald's, it's all digital. You order digitally, you pay digitally. But you still need humans. There are still humans in McDonald's, right? So for the moment, we have not eliminated people as a way of delivering services. And again, services make up the majority of our GDP.
Yeah. So the part that I think about is, for example, Starbucks, right? So when I order my Starbucks in the morning, I get out of my car, I go into Starbucks, and it's nice to greet everybody and say hello, and that's always a nice thing to do. But my main mission is to go in there, grab my coffee, come out, because I need to get to work.
Yeah.
Right. So if the CEO really talked a lot about this too, that he doesn't want that. He's trying to create an environment where it's welcoming, and that's why they're drawing, good morning on your cups and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but for me, I'm like, okay, I don't really need that. I'm okay with going in there, grabbing my coffee, as long as the quality's there. So if you turn Starbucks into a robotic place, I personally think I'd be okay with that. But if I'm speaking to my CPA, my attorney, someone that does what I do for a living, what you do for, I do think there's a human element that people need and want, right?
Well,
Maybe the younger generation may not need it as much. So the question is, what businesses do we need humans? What businesses do we not need?
so I would say to a degree, we need humans for every business. Right? So I started by saying a real estate investment trust. When you look at the proportion of assets to the proportion of human expense makes up a very small part of either the revenue stream or the asset profile. But when you look at a bank or a consulting firm or an accounting firm or a legal firm or an advertising agency, those organizations don't actually make things. They're professional services firms where the person is the product.
Right. Correct.
So, as you said before, AI isn't innovative. It doesn't come up with new ideas. All it can do is repackage what's already in its database, but it can't be innovative. It can't come up with new stuff. So, if you think about innovation, there's two types of innovation. There's incremental innovation, which is taking an idea and making it just a little bit better. Or there's new innovation, where you come up with something completely new. Generative AI cannot come up with something completely new. It can only create incremental innovation. And even at that, it's not very good.
So Solange, I was having a conversation with one of my best friends today about this, and we were saying that, for example, we take three financial advisors. They're all meeting with this big prospect who has $50 million as an example, right? And all three of them, let's say, they go into AI and they plug into the prospect, the background of the prospect, assets they have, investments they have, and they say, come up with how I should approach this prospect. And then the system, the AI, then tells the financial advisor maybe how you should approach this particular prospect. If all three of those advisors did that, they're going to come back to the prospect with very similar ideas and thoughts on how they approach that, right?
Or very different.
Well, so here's my point.
Based on the prompt question, based on the prompts, so the
right.
output is only as good as the prompt question.
Those that are most creative in using AI are those that are going to succeed the most.
Probably.
And I see that how I use the tool and how creative I'm using the tool to give me certain outputs that are making me better as in every aspect of the business.
Well, okay, so let me ask you a question. Do you think it's making you better because you're spending more time thinking, being creative, solving problems, than doing the grunt work of the research on the client?
Yeah, I think it's I think a big part is what you just said, the freeing up it's almost like when I go on if I were to get on a plane right now, go down to Florida as an example, when I get on that plane, go down to Florida for those 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, all of a sudden I become creative because I'm not in front of my computer doing day-to-day tasks, whatever it may be. So, so I think it's going to create, and that's why I keep saying to everybody, everybody's so concerned about, listen, old jobs like a typist was replaced by a computer.
That's right.
So tractor suppliers, replaced farmers and things. So old jobs will go by the wayside, but new jobs will evolve, and that's
right. I remember in my first job, I worked for the Hay Group, and it was before we had personal computers on everybody's desk, and we had a word processing department where I would write out my reports by hand and then give it to the word processing supervisor.
Incredible.
Who would then assign it to a word processor who would then bring me back the typed up version with my original, and I'd go page by page to see if they're right. And the key was your relationship with the word processing supervisor, because if she didn't like you, she would put your work at the bottom of the pile. She would wait for an hour before assigning it. So, one was learning how to manage the system, and the second was it took a lot of time to write things out by hand. So yes, word processing went away when personal computers ended up on our desks and we could write our own things.
Right,
Right.
right.
So yes, it's displaced. But because of that, new things evolved.
Absolutely. And that's
Right?
exactly what happened. I mean, I say it all the time, this iPhone of ours, right?
Yep.
So it's something on there called apps. Well,
Yeah.
when those apps came about, that created an entirely new economy, which is
That's
multi-billions of dollars.
that's exactly right. So now the question is, how do we understand the value creating impact of humans and human augmentation to business outcomes? Right? So if you're a business owner, you say, oh, I've got, 20, 100, 1,000 employees working for me. How do I know that I'm getting a return on my investment in people? And that's always been sort of a little bit of a blind spot. In fact, up until 2020, and I'll tell you why that date is important, and beyond, even though we had a milestone event in 2020, CEOs and CFOs typically think of HR as an expense, necessary evil, a sunk cost, right? So we don't think of the money that we invest in people, in salaries, benefits, programs, initiatives, as actually producing measurable value. It's sort of like the cost of doing business. So we look at that expense, we put it to the side, and we say that's our sunk cost. And then we look at the other expenses in the business, and we try to engineer them financially to get a better return on our investment, right? So, and I don't want to get too technical, but when we look at a cash flow statement, we look at the three areas that companies invest money: operating, financial, and investments, right? Those are the three big areas. And we try to optimize the investment and the financing, and we look at the operations and we try to optimize that as well, right? So we optimize it by getting smarter machines, better technology. But the largest, and for most organizations, the single largest line item expense are your people. And we don't have a way of saying, yes, we're going to put more money in people because we're getting a bigger return out of them. So why did I say 2020? In 2020, the SEC made a pronouncement that human capital, what we spend on people, is not essentially an expense, but it's an investment in an intangible asset. So what does that mean? That people are actually driving value creation for organizations. But most people don't understand how to measure that. I can promise you that CFOs don't know how to measure that. Yeah, wait. So here's a little insight. So now that we know that human capital, that the investment in people is actually an intangible asset, it's something that drives value creation for organizations. How do we measure that? So for the last 30 years or so, this concept has been measured in the academic community. And there are actual metrics that we can use to measure the return on investment in people. The ISO organization, the International Standardization Organization in Switzerland, you've heard of ISO 9000, you've heard of these ISO standards. They actually have a team of people worldwide that work on human capital standards. That group of people is called the TC 260 Committee, TC for Technical Committee. I don't know what the 260 is, I should ask, because I am a member of that committee. And so there's this global organization. Each major country has their own committee. And in 2018, the ISO organization released a standard called the ISO 30414, which is called Human Capital Governance and Reporting. And in that standard, we're helping organizations figure out what to measure, how to measure, to understand the material impact of human capital on sustainable financial outcomes. We revised that standard in 2025. It just came out in August of last year. And in that standard, we actually define some of these metrics. One metric is called HCROI, Human Capital Return on Investment. It's super easy to calculate, and I'm going to tell it to you right now. So,
Please do.
and your listeners are users of financial information, so you're going to get it. Numerator is revenue minus expense. So what does that look like? Profit. Adjusted for, so the numerator is basically your gross profit adjusted for the cost of human capital, or what we call TCOW, total cost of workforce. So anything in your general ledger that's coded to an HR expense, salaries, bonuses, benefits,
Taxes.
social taxes, the use of contractors, your HRIS system, the cost of recruiting if you hire recruiters, your summer party, your winter party, your training budget, anything that has to do with human capital is total cost of workforce. So your numerator is revenue minus expense adjusted for the total cost of human capital, TCOW. So expense minus TCOW. So your expense number is going to be smaller, right? Make sense?
Yes.
So it's your gross profit adjusted for the actual cost of humans and human initiatives. The denominator is TCOW. So think about that. The human capital return on investment, HCROI, is a measure of how every dollar you spend on people is generating an adjusted return.
All right, I got to stop you real quick. So the denominator you said was revenue minus expenses, correct?
The numerator.
The numerator, right? Revenue minus expenses.
Adjusted for TCOW. So what it looks like is revenue minus expense minus total cost of workforce. So you're reducing your expense, your operating expense, by the cost of your workforce.
Right.
So your numerator is going to be an adjusted gross profit, and it's adjusted to exclude the cost of your workforce, your TCOW.
So if you have $1 million in revenue and you have $500,000 in total expenses, including TCOW,
right?
Minus TCOW.
Exactly right. And let's say your
TCOW was 200,000.
Let's say your TCOW is 400,000.
So right, so it'd be $1 million minus 5, which is 5 minus 4, which is 100,000.
Right.
And then the denominator is TCOW.
Is 400.
400. So 400 minus 100 divided by 400 divided by 100.
Right. But most organizations, I mean, we can look. So here's another thing. I have an HCROI calculator on my website, so you don't even have to do the math. You put in the numbers. So if our numerator is $1 million, right? And our total expenses are $500,000. And let's make it easy. Let's say our cost of workforce is $250,000.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're taking $1 million and we're subtracting from that $250,000.
Correct.
Right? So your numerator now is $750,000 and your denominator is $250,000, making your HCROI $3. So what is this saying? It's saying for every dollar I invest in people, I get $3 of adjusted profit back. Yay. Anything over $1, you're break even. Anything under $1, you're investing more in your people than they are generating for you as a return to the company.
That's very interesting.
And what we're seeing is that because human capital is such a big part of operating expense, it's highly leverageable. That small improvements in human capital performance generate big impact. In fact, what I'm finding with my clients is that a 5% improvement in HCROI. So here our HCROI is $3. So
right.
A 5% improvement would be $3.15, right? So if we moved our HCROI from $3 to $3.15, doesn't feel like it's a big improvement. It can actually drop about 20 to 25% profit to the bottom line. Yeah. So if our profit in this company was $500,000, right, we can improve that $500,000 by another 20%.
And how do you come up with that?
It's math. It's just math. It's simply, I mean, I'm not talking to you about engagement or productivity or culture. I'm a financial person.
Right.
So when you talk to me about those touchy-feely things, my eyes start to cross a little bit because I want things that are measurable. So one of the biggest expenses for organizations is attrition and replacing employees. Huge. So on my website, we also have a cost of attrition calculator. So all you have to do is put in the numbers and then you can see, and then you can play with it. If your current attrition is 20%, and you can see how much that attrition is costing you. If you can lower your attrition by 2%, you can see the reduction in cost by that 2% reduction in attrition. And then you can ask yourself, let's say 20% attrition is actually the equivalent, the cost of that attrition is 30% of your payroll. And you can reduce that attrition by 2%, and it'll save you 5-6% of your payroll. You have to ask yourself the question, how much am I willing to invest to lower my attrition to avoid this cost? And usually it's a fraction.
So when you're doing the calculation of the human capital return on investment, and you look at your number, right? Whether it's $1, $2, $3, 50 cents. So how does one use that number to make business decisions?
So if you are below $1, you have to do something, because every dollar you invest in people is actually costing the organization.
So most likely in that scenario, what is it that you recommend people do?
Well, we need to understand what the root cause of that low level of productivity is, because so here's another good example. I worked with a CEO of a telecommunications company, a hardware company, and he was a really smart guy. Harvard law degree, was the CEO of a couple of big telecom companies. And then he got money from a private equity firm to build this business. And what he was doing, because that segment of the market is very decentralized. So he was buying lots of these little mom and pop.
Yeah.
And so I was working with him, and we were looking at, and this was a dirty boots business. So most of their employees were on the ground, like dirty boots. They would be climbing the poles. So their average revenue per employee was about $75,000 to $80,000. So how do you figure that out? You take your revenue and you divide it by the number of full-time equivalent employees, and then you get a productivity number, right? So if the average productivity across the whole organization is $75,000, and your average pay, so your total cost of your total compensation cost, and you can put benefits in there, and you can put social taxes in there.
Right.
You can, make the number what makes most sense to represent your business, divided by the same number of employees. So in his case, it was about $75,000 per employee in productivity and about $70,000 of average pay. That's not a big margin. And so I was saying, listen, we have to look at this ratio, and you can turn it into a ratio. If it's 75 divided by 70, you know what your ratio is. For every dollar is producing how much in productivity, in revenue per employee. And I said, let's be careful, because he wanted to start hiring all these expensive people. And I said, well, let's be careful about that because you don't want your average productivity to be lower than your average pay. And he sort of looked at me and he's, because I said to him, look, your average productivity is about $75,000. Your average pay is about 70. So we want to make sure that we're managing that. And he said, yeah, okay. And I was getting that he wasn't really understanding it. So then I explained it to him and he said, all these years I've been hearing about average productivity and never really knowing how to apply it. And now you've shown me that the most important measure is how much productivity do we get out of people compared to how much we pay them. And it's like, yeah, that's a fundamental part of your business. And guess what? It has nothing to do with culture, engagement. These are numbers. So what I say is I'm like the Rosetta Stone. I take human capital information and transform it into financial indicators so that now you can say, oh, look at this metric on the HR side. How does it compare to a metric on the financial side so that we can understand how effective and efficient our human capital is in driving economic value creation. And we can do it without the stories, just with numbers.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I want to conclude with this.
Okay.
Right? And I sort of said it before. So you have this valuable information. And so from your experience, how do businesses use this information? So if their team is not showing productivity and they're below 1 as an example, right? Or if they're at 2 and they want to be at 4.
Yep.
So just quickly, help me understand the things they can.
Or they're at 2 and their competitors are at 1.25. Or they're at 2 and their competitors are at 5. So we use these ratios to help inform management decisions. So if your HCROI is below 1, we need to take a look at your business model. We need to understand what human capital is in the organization, whether or not you have the right people in the right jobs, whether or not you have the right jobs, right? So it's a signal. We don't want to fix something that's not broken. So we use human capital metrics, and there are a whole bunch of them. So I just told you about HCROI. There's human capital value add. There's human economic value add. There's human capital market value. And again, you don't survey your employees. There's nothing subjective in those numbers. It's outcome measures that we transform into metrics so that we can then compare them to financial metrics. So we're we're turning oranges into apples to compare to apples. So we use the information as signals, and then we become detectives and we work backwards, because my perspective is that there's a causal effect between human capital performance and corporate financial performance. That's a no-brainer. That makes sense. But how do we unpack human capital performance so that we can understand the root cause of some of the problems? And again, if we're spending if employees are the largest line item expense in our organization, we want to optimize that. We want to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for the buck.
Right.
Right. And because it's leverageable, small improvements in human capital performance generate big outcomes on profitability.
It's probably one of the most important things to recognize.
Yeah, especially for small businesses, even for large businesses. The financial people have always drawn a line where people sit, right? So they draw a line, they sort of wall off this part of the business model around people and say, oh, people are unpredictable, it's hard to measure, we don't have the tools to do that. So they say sunk cost, and that's why if CFOs understood how leverageable small improvements in people were, they wouldn't automatically reject any budget increase for human capital, right? And there's 2 reasons for that. One is we don't understand how to leverage human capital performance effectively or measure it. And the second is the fault of the HR people. And that's what I teach my students, is how to create a financial business case. So everyone else in the organization that goes to the CFO for budget, marketing, sales, operations, procurement. Everybody goes to the CFO with a business case. Give me this money, I'll generate this return, except for HR. HR says, more? Can I have more, sir?
Right.
Without saying a 5% improvement in our salary budget will generate a 8% reduction in our attrition, which will save $30 million, $40 million. I'm asking you for $10 million to avoid a $30 million cost. If HR went to a CFO with that kind of a business case, they'd get funding, but they just go like, Oliver, can I? So let me just end, because I know you want to end. Let me just end with this story. I helped an organization that had an $8 billion revenue budget, and they were an $8 billion revenue organization, really massively big, about 48,000 employees. The head of HR had a $3.8 billion budget, big budget. And she came to me and she said, we're about to go into budget cycle. I need $161 million. And they've already told me they're probably going to cut my budget. So help me. So I said, what are you going to spend that money on? So we worked. I'm not going to talk you through the whole thing, but the long and the short of it is she did two things. One, she involved her head of FP&A to get their input. And two, we previewed it with the CFO. So by the time she got into her budget meeting, she had some support and some awareness at the table. And she walked out of that budget meeting with $261 million. Why? Because, as she says, the money was great, but what was more important was that the executive committee now saw human capital as something we have to invest in to get a return instead of merely an expense. And what we showed, the reason that she got more money is because what we showed is that $161 million was going to be used for retention. And if we dropped attrition by 2%, we would generate $169 million cost avoidance. So the CFO said, well, I'm not actually giving you $161 million. I'm lending you $161 million because within the 6 months, you're actually going to help us avoid $169 million. So I'm getting a return on that investment. I'm lending you money and getting that back. And then he said, and then I'm going to give you $100 million more because now I understand that investing in people generates value for us. So I want to see how you're going to invest that $100 million and what kind of a return you're going to generate for us. It was a whole different, it completely transformed how the organization thought about human capital. Very consistent with the way the SEC is now thinking about human capital, that we're investing in it and we expect organizations to measure the return on investment in human capital. And that's human capital materiality.
That's terrific. Solange, this is really excellent. Anybody's listening to this, I mean, there's tremendous value in everything you're saying. I'm a math guy, and that to me drives everything and helps make decisions. So
yeah,
extremely valuable. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And you could just tell my audience, what is your website? How can they find you?
Sure. My website is www.HC Human Capital Moneyball, like Richard Lewis's Moneyball. So all one word, hcmoneyball.com. And if you go to the website, on the top right-hand side, there's a little button that says resources. And we have two calculators, one for HCROI that requires you put in 4 data points, and one for cost of attrition, which requires that you put in 6 data points. And the calculator will automatically not only calculate your HCROI and your cost of attrition, but show you the economic opportunity of improving HCROI or reducing attrition. And we do not keep any of that data. So feel free to use it. There's no we don't have anything on the back end that stores that data.
Right,
It's gone
right,
once you're
right.
out of the calculator. So feel free to use it because we're not tracking and monitoring you.
Excellent.
The
Yes.
only thing we ask is we use it as a lead magnet. So we're going to ask you for your name and your contact information, and go ahead and use the calculator and get a taste of how powerful managing human capital effectively can be in terms of a driver of sustainable profitability, value creation for your organization. And if I could just do a little plug for my book,
Sure.
it's called Humanizing Human Capital. And the tagline, the subtitle is Invest in Your People for Optimal Business Returns. So the whole book is set up as a roadmap for you to be able to measure the material impact of investments in human capital.
Excellent, Solange. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And thanks for your time today. And let's stay in touch, of course. And I look forward to having you on at another time as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.